I think we hear the term or the phrase intellectual property rights a lot. And one thing I would like everyone to understand is, in my view, intellectual property rights as a phrase is very generic, because that phrase refers to something more specific: copyrights, trademarks, patents, trade secrets, geographical indications, designs, because each one of these is a form of intellectual property governed by specific laws and regulations, meaning that they are each protected for different lengths of time. There are different ways to protect in the marketplace, and also there are different ways to get these legal rights. One thing to think about as well, as you raise the issue of ideas and innovation. Well, when we get these ideas and act on those ideas to either create a product or offer a service, the question then becomes, which forms of intellectual property rights might be available in order to protect our product or our service? So I take the action of acting on my ideas to create a product. Now the question becomes, legally, how do I protect it? Do I protect it with a patent? Do I protect it with a trademark or the copyright laws? Sometimes it may be a combination of more than one of those. And so what we need to do is have people understand that all these creative juices that they have in them, and when they actually take the action and create the product, now we've got something that we can actually move forward and protect with the law. And I think that's something very basic we really want people to understand. If you sit there in your room or in your classroom or wherever you may be, or at your job, at your desk, and you think of various ideas but you do nothing about them, well, then they just disappear. But the real question is, what action are you going to take to make this become a reality? And then it's, how do we protect them with these laws? And so that link is there. Let me show you, if I can, something very simple. I think probably everyone can, or most of us, can identify with something like this, something very simple. It's a plastic lid. It has a hole. I can walk down the street and I can sip my coffee, tea, whatever. Okay, pretty simple. But what if I take that same thing and now I make an improvement? All right? So I still have this hole. I can still drink out of it. I take my sip, but I want to make sure that it doesn't come onto my clothes. Isn't this innovation? Isn't this an improvement of the other one that I held up? This, by the way, in the United States, is protected by a patent. So, innovation is taking something you see, or maybe you didn't see, but improving on or acting on that. And then the question is, what does the law say as far as how I might be able to protect it with intellectual property? So I made the improvement. It's very simple. Innovation does not mean we made the greatest new medicine. Innovation can be change, improvement, something simple. My guess is, even in Chile, you have perhaps hundreds of thousands of people that have great ideas. And it does not have to be the next great telephone or the next great computer chip. It can be something that's useful in society. This is pretty useful. I'm saving my clothes from dripping hot coffee on it, right? So I think we need to rethink what we mean by the word innovation. And realize that almost anybody can come up with an idea that improves upon an existing thing. Well, I think in listening to the question you've raised, you do have an intellectual property office within the government that receives applications for these new inventions, innovation as you call it, or if you have a new product and you want to put a logo on, a brand name on, so for trademarks. I think the bigger question isn't whether this office exists, because it does. The bigger challenge is, how do you make more people in your society aware that these new ideas that they come up with and act on could be protected, and how do they go about protecting them? That, to me, is the bigger question. The institutions exist in government. The real question is, are the government institutions that do exist, are they properly reaching out throughout the country, whether it's to the universities, whether it's to local business groups, and saying, look, these things you do every day, whether to improve a product, create a new product, improve your services that you are offering to the consumer, what is it out there that you are doing every day that could potentially be protected by copyright, trademark, patents, trade secrets, designs? I think that's the bigger challenge, is how do you leave the capital, for example, and go to those small towns where somebody may have a great idea, but he doesn't or she doesn't realize that this could be protected. This could be put in the marketplace. This can then generate income, either for themselves or their whole business. And then how does that income translate to jobs, more tax revenues for the local and national economies? In general, how does all this get connected, and how do you make people more aware that these things are connected? Certainly in the United States, almost all universities, colleges, actually have agreements with their faculty members about who's going to own the result of research and development that could be patented products. And you have basically an employment agreement that outlines whose rights these will be. And in fact, our universities are extremely active in research development and also going and applying for patents, because frankly, by having a patent, having this new technology or whatever it may be, and then licensing the use of that technology to generate income back to the university, it gives the university more financial resources that will fund additional research. So the money gets reinvested. The patent becomes an asset, and it's an asset that can be used to generate even more revenue back into the university. Now that's one way. What is also happening today is we now have spin-offs. Usually a spin-off is you have a company and something happens and there's another company created from an existing company. What we have today in the United States are faculty members who are perhaps in the chemistry department or the engineering department coming up with new products and opening up companies based upon that research. So all of a sudden you have faculty members that are becoming executives in businesses because they're taking this technology and saying, we don't need to generate income just for a university. We can start a new company. We bring in people with proper specialties. We're creating jobs, but we're also creating new commercial products. And so this is yet another way. In fact, I personally have actually hired for work for me a spin-off from a university that does specialized software, for example. So here they are getting business from me, which means I have to I give them money to do work for me. It's not the university, it's private business. So universities could play a major role, but they need to have somebody helping to guide them about what to look for, or at least how to manage their portfolio, their collection of intellectual property assets, and how to generate more revenue for the university. You know, many public universities are funded just by government. Well, this is a way for the university to be an active player in the economy in a very different way, generating their own income. What the government does is creates the legal infrastructure so that hopefully what people understand is that those of you who wish to be creative, wish to be innovative, and come up with new products, new brand of products, and so on, you will be provided, hopefully, an effective legal system that allows you to go out there, put your product in the marketplace, compete fairly, and when somebody attempts to steal your intellectual property asset, you have the legal means to stop them from doing that. That's really what the government policy has to be about. The government policy doesn't know who will be the next great person to come up with a new product. We don't know who that is. It could be anybody, but that's the point. The legal structure should be broad enough, fair enough, efficient enough to let anybody who understands the system to take advantage of the system. So when we talk about government policy, it's really a matter of providing in the laws sufficient protections in the law so that it's hopefully not too expensive to get a patent or a trademark or a design protected, so that you can actually get the legal protection. And then when you're in the marketplace, if someone attempts to steal your design, your trademark, your patented product, or your technology, that you now have also the legal means and the proper legal steps are available through the courts or whatever to actually stop them from stealing your asset, because you rely on that asset to stay in business, to continue business, and to continue generating income. And the interest of the government, frankly, is that your success actually benefits the government, because when you're a successful business and you're paying employees who pay taxes, or your business pays taxes from profits, the government also gets a share through the taxes. And so they have a vested interest in your success, in that the court system works, that the intellectual property office also is effective and efficient in timely considering your application, because each application represents your desire to be active in the market. Well, I think the fundamentals are here. And by the way, I think that no matter where we go in the world, when you talk to business people, they always say that the laws could be better. And even in the United States, I mean, we've always got people saying the laws could be better. The real question becomes, sometimes it's not that you need to make laws better. You just need to implement them in action better. The real question is, when I read a law, I want to know, is what the law says the reality on the ground? Okay? For example, if I'm going to invest a lot of money in creating a product or a service to put into the market, your law may not be as good as someone else's law, but the question is, to the extent that the law says I can have this level of protection, do I really get that? Because someone else could have a much better law, but their implementation is much worse than yours. So there are many different factors that one has to look at. And by the way, it's not just the intellectual property law itself. What about if I file an application to get a patent or a trademark in your country? How long am I going to wait? Because the length of time I'm waiting for your intellectual property office is time that I cannot fully invest in your economy, because I'm not sure if they're going to recognize my rights. So that factors in as well. So when we talk about institutions, it's not just the law, but also the various parts of the government that supports that law. It also is awareness of the courts and so on. So it's a much bigger question when we think about these kinds of things, because from a business perspective, you're competing against basically every other country in the region. You're competing against even the United States. Should I stay there or should I go somewhere else? What's my business plan? So it's a large package of business considerations we actually look at. And truly, what is the difference between what the law says and the reality of how it's practiced and put into practice is a big question. I remember being in Vietnam years ago, and in reality, the penalties, for example, were fine. There was one problem. The judges never imposed the penalties that were available to them, which meant that the enforcement was actually weak, even though it could have been stronger simply if they had implemented what the law allowed. Now, this has been 10 or 12 years ago. They may be better now. I'm just saying at that moment in time when I was there, I felt like it wasn't the law that was the problem. Sometimes it's the implementation of that law. And you can look at that all the time. I mean, it depends on what form of intellectual property I'm most interested in? Is it the patent that I rely on the most? Is it the trademark that I rely on most? Or is it the copyright? So different companies are going to have a different reaction depending upon which intellectual property they're most concerned about. And so it's hard to give you these blanket answers because, as I said at the beginning, we look at each form of intellectual property, we look at the different levels of protection provided by the law, and we also look at, in practice, what's going on in the real, when I say the marketplace, I also mean how do the courts deal with it? How does customs deal with it? How does everyone else that's really involved and active deal with it? Well, if I'm understanding the question correctly, you're probably referring to what we call the Special 301 list that the U.S. government issues every year. Okay. Well, one thing is for sure that our U.S. businesses that have the opportunity to raise these issues, they are certainly active in this area, and they will identify shortcomings or deficiencies, at least in their perspective, in all kinds of countries, whether it's Canada, whether it's Chile, whether it's France, or wherever it is. No country seems to be exempt from needing to maybe improve. I come back to what I said a few moments ago. I think it's going to depend upon the industry because you have to realize that this list that the U.S. government issues is based on the input of businesses that are doing business here. And so what's going on is that the particular businesses that are active in your economy are the ones that are saying these are still obstacles for us in the area of intellectual property. And so they consult with the U.S. government. So what this reflects is not so much the U.S. government's criticisms. It reflects potential obstacles, at least as identified by companies. My guess is that when we see some of these issues, it's probably an issue or a problem, potentially an obstacle, that's also being experienced by other foreign companies. So while it comes from the United States, it's probably a problem that is experienced by companies from other countries as well. And it's really a matter of trying to sit down and understand what these obstacles are, and then trying to figure out how do we resolve some of these problems. Some of them may be simply implementation of an existing provision, and sometimes that is what it is. Maybe a ministry doesn't fully appreciate or understand how to implement something that's already in the law. Or sometimes it is what companies may perceive as the law just isn't strong enough. And of course, it takes time to change laws. Sometimes it's an actual enforcement mechanism. Maybe a particular part of the government that has enforcement responsibility is not fully living up to what is expected of them by the business sector. So it really does depend industry to industry. Because if you take a look at the luxury goods sector, their complaints may be very different from the medicine sector, which could be very different from another sector. So we look at this stuff and say, what are the specific issues or obstacles by the different sectors? And then it's really a matter of working not with just the U.S. government, but from the business community, trying to resolve and overcome those deficiencies. And you have to identify what are they really? Is it the law? Is it practice? Is it something else? So unfortunately, it's not an easy answer because it depends upon what those problems have been, what have been identified by the U.S. government in their report. Well, I think there's certainly been some significant positive steps made in the region. Clearly, the free trade agreements that have been concluded, whether it's the U.S.-Chile Free Trade Agreement or the U.S.-Central America Free Trade Agreement, basically demonstrate forward steps. Because at the very least, governments have committed, both sides have committed to improving not just the laws themselves, but the enforcement structure also. Trying to modernize, trying to address technological changes and advances that touch on intellectual property issues. So whenever governments agree to raise the standards of protection, it's certainly positive. The problem is that you can never stop improving because everything changes faster and faster. Standards have to be changed. You know, if you think about it like a company, I mean, a company cannot make a product today and then say, oh, we're not going to improve our product, we're not going to do anything for the next 5 years. No, once they put that new product in the marketplace, they turn around the next day and start looking for ways to improve it or ways to make a new product. And I think this is where governments have to start thinking and acting a little bit more like businesses, which is we can't just stop because we sign an agreement. Now the next step from signing that agreement is how are we doing, how do we perform with regard to fulfilling all the things that we said we would do under the agreement? And not only that, what are things going on in the business sector that it will require us to take more steps to protect intellectual property, even if no one else says we have to? Because what we're trying to do is constantly improve the business environment, not just for foreign businesses, but our own businesses. How do we encourage our own businesses to expand? How do we encourage people to invest in a new business? So it's not always looking outward, it's really looking at how do we sustain our own economic growth? Because when you look around the world, the competition gets stronger and stronger every single day. We can't wait for other people to tell us to get better. We should be doing that automatically ourselves. What's your education policy in order to make sure that people that are coming out of your schools and your universities can deal with new technologies, create their own new technologies and so on? Are they employable in high-tech jobs if they come here? So there are lots of things. What about the tax structure? You know, are we making it easier for companies that are new businesses or expanding small, medium enterprises? Can they understand it? Or are they spending so much money paying a consultant that they can't invest in the business itself? So there are lots of things. I mean, when we talk about intellectual property and agreements, agreements are helpful and good to look at because we can all understand what the new standard is. But the real question is, what are governments doing on their own without outside pressure to constantly improve that business environment? Because if you don't do it, you may be falling behind countries in Asia or Eastern Europe or somewhere else, or even here in the region, because there are countries out there that realize in order for our businesses to constantly grow and improve and compete better, we'll have to do it. We can't wait for somebody else to tell us what the problem is. We have to identify them ourselves and improve the laws ourselves. And that's really what will help, hopefully, to long-term sustaining of economic growth. Because at the end of the day, you want to encourage creative people to actually come out and protect it, to start that new business. And when we talk about innovation and so on, personally, I don't like that word innovation because it seems like people tie the word innovation just to patents. And when we talk about change and improvements to things, it can be almost anything. You know, it doesn't matter what it is. We have companies that have been in business for 100 years, and what they realize is, yes, we have a trademark, a logo that everybody recognizes, but this was a trademark or a logo from 100 years ago we need to modernize. And what you see, even for trademarks and logos, is they will refine the artwork or something like that to modernize it. And even for that, that's change. And that's innovation, because you have to come back and recreate, if you will, and still protect it with intellectual property assets. So I tend to, I've come to dislike the word innovation a lot in the last couple of years, but the point is taking each individual's creative intellectual power and finding a way to protect it with the intellectual property, the legal system and the legal regime. We all have it. We all have the capability to do it. The real question is, how easy or how difficult has the government made it to actually protect that creativity? And what are they doing to make sure more people know about it and understand it, even in the smaller villages, smaller towns? It's not something limited to the big cities. And it's not limited to people that have university degrees, because sometimes when you think of something like this, you don't have to have 2 or 3 university degrees to come up with something that has so much common sense built in, right? And we need to be able to capture that kind of thinking. On the one hand, it seems so simple. On the other hand, Maybe not. And that's our challenge, is really to continue to encourage that kind of creativity and apply it to the intellectual property. One has to remember that the law is written in a way that says to the government, in order for somebody to get a patent, there are certain requirements, there are minimum standards. In other words, the change has to be something that was not obvious. It has to be new, novel, non-obvious. And so when somebody submits the application, the Intellectual Property Office, they have specialists that are examiners. And they look at the so-called new invention and they say, well, wait a minute, is this really new? Or is this something that somebody who worked on this could easily have come up with that solution? So it's not as easy necessarily as one might think. There are legal standards that have to be met. In the United States, you have both the law and then the judicial interpretations. For example, even if the government office says, yes, we'll give this person a patent, the person who had a patent earlier could take that to court and argue that, no, this should never have been patented, and we want the court to say this patent that was issued after us is not valid. So there are legal steps, and that's what I was referring to earlier. Whether we're talking about a trademark, whether we talk about patents, the law has in it certain standards, minimum requirements that must be passed in order to get a trademark, copyright, patent, so on. So there are ways to challenge government actions, whether it's in the courts, whether it's administratively. So that's the investment that we have to make in protecting our creative, our innovative ideas and the products in the marketplace. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as a global patent or a global trademark. You have to seek a patent or a trademark in all the countries where you want to be active in the marketplace. The only one that's different really is copyrights. If these countries, and under the World Trade Organization, countries that are a member of Berne Convention, for example, if I create a work that is protected by copyright, then it must be protected in all those countries. But trademarks and patents are different.